The Catholic Church threatened eternal damnation for anyone who used weapon number 7 on this list. Knights used it anyway, and what they did with it was so disturbing that entire kingdoms tried to erase it from history. So why has almost no one heard of it? In 1139, Pope Innocent II stood before the Second Lateran Council and declared the crossbow deathly and hateful to God, banned, forbidden. Anyone who used it against fellow Christians faced eternal damnation. And knights used it anyway, every single one. Here's why the church panicked. A peasant, some nobody who'd spent his whole life shoveling manure, could pick up a crossbow, get 2 weeks of training, and put a bolt straight through a knight who'd trained since childhood. Decades of sword practice? Worthless. Expensive chainmail passed down through generations, punched through at 150 yards like it was made of cheese. The ruling class was terrified. And honestly, I get it. Your entire social order depends on the idea that nobles are better at fighting than commoners. Then some farmer's kid with a cheap weapon makes that a lie. But here's where it gets hypocritical. During the Crusades, knights suddenly loved crossbows. Their reasoning? The Pope only banned using them against Christians. Muslims weren't covered. Convenient, right? Richard the Lionheart became obsessed with the weapon. He deployed thousands of crossbowmen across his campaigns. Then, in 1199, a crossbow bolt killed him during a siege in France. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. The man who weaponized the crossbow more than any English king died by his favorite toy. Now, here's the kicker. That papal ban? It stayed on the books for over 400 years. 4 centuries of this weapon is forbidden by God. And armies kept stockpiling them like the Pope was just making suggestions, but the crossbow was actually the gentle option compared to what's coming next, because the Byzantines created something that made burning alive look peaceful. Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's ultimate weapon. And they were so paranoid about it that revealing the formula meant death. Not exile, not prison, execution. Even emperors didn't know the complete recipe. The empire split the formula among different craftsmen, so no single person could ever recreate it alone. That's not secrecy. That's obsession. And honestly, they had good reason. This stuff floated on water. Let that sink in. You're on a wooden ship, flames everywhere, and you think jumping overboard will save you. Nope. The fire follows you. It keeps burning on the surface while you're splashing around like a panicked duck. I've burned toast that was easier to extinguish. During the siege of Constantinople in 678 AD, Arab fleets learned this the hard way. Byzantine sailors mounted bronze tubes on their ship bows, basically medieval flamethrowers, and sprayed liquid fire across enemy vessels. 50 feet of range. Entire fleets turned into floating crematoriums. The Arabs were so traumatized, they tried negotiating treaties to ban the weapon. Diplomatic discussions about Greek fire probably went something like, "Please stop melting our navy. Sincerely, everyone." Modern chemists have spent decades analyzing Byzantine texts. Their best guess? Crude oil mixed with pine resin and quicklime. That last ingredient is the nasty part. Quicklime ignites when it touches water. So the more you tried drowning the flames, the angrier they got. But here's the tragedy. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the formula vanished forever. Completely lost. 700 years of trying to recreate it, and nobody succeeded. The Byzantines took their secret to the grave. Speaking of secrets, some medieval weapons weren't banned because they were too destructive. They were banned because they were too sneaky, poisoned weapons. The ultimate I don't care about your rules move? Every medieval code of honor agreed on one thing. Coating your blade with toxins made you a murderer, not a warrior. Knights who poisoned their swords weren't just breaking laws. They were booking their souls a one-way ticket to hell, at least according to the church. Did that stop anyone? Absolutely not. Italian city-states turned poison into an art form. They developed cantarella, an arsenic compound so potent that a tiny scratch could kill you within days. The Borgias supposedly loved this stuff. A nick from a poisoned ring during a friendly handshake, and 3 days later, you're attending your own funeral. Here's what made battlefield poison particularly nasty. A knight survives a sword fight, celebrates his victory, maybe drinks some wine. 2 weeks later, he's dead from a mysterious fever. Doctors blame bad air or divine punishment. Nobody suspected the blade that barely grazed his arm. Aconite was the real nightmare fuel, extracted from pretty little monkshood flowers that look completely harmless. This stuff caused heart failure so fast that some victims collapsed before finishing dinner. One minute you're eating roast pheasant, the next minute you are the cold meat. And those Venetian assassins, they perfected hollow rings with hidden needles inside. A warm greeting at a diplomatic meeting, a firm handshake, a tiny prick you barely notice. Dead within the week. The church threatened eternal damnation for poisoners. Yet somehow, assassination by poison actually increased during the 1400s. Weird how hellfire warnings don't work when there's political power at stake, but poison required patience. Some warriors wanted their enemies captured alive, not dead. And they invented a horrifying tool specifically for that purpose. The man-catcher might be the most honest weapon in medieval history. Forget honor, forget glory. This thing existed purely for profit. Picture a pole about 8 feet long with a spring-loaded metal collar at the end. Those prongs snapped around a knight's neck like a bear trap. But here's the key. They didn't kill him. They just held him there helpless while his captors calculated how much his family would pay to get him back. And families paid. Oh, they paid dearly. King John II of France got captured at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356. His ransom? 3 million gold crowns. That's roughly $4 billion today. For one guy. Makes you understand why soldiers suddenly got very interested in taking prisoners instead of corpses. The economics were brutal but simple. Kill a knight, you get his armor and horse. Capture him alive? You might fund your entire village for a decade. Common soldiers got stabbed immediately. But a nobleman in fancy plate armor? That man was basically a walking lottery ticket. Now, military authorities hated this weapon, not because it was cruel, because it encouraged mercenary thinking. Soldiers started fighting for ransom money instead of loyalty or duty. Why die for your king when you could retire wealthy by grabbing the right prisoner? German mercenaries absolutely loved these things. They called them catchpoles and kept using them well into the 1600s. Every ban, every noble complaint, every appeal to honor just bounced right off. The man-catcher worked too well to disappear, but grabbing knights required getting close to them first, and cavalry charges made that nearly impossible, unless you had something that could stop a warhorse dead in its tracks without ever swinging a blade. Caltrops are proof that sometimes the simplest ideas cause the most chaos. 4 iron spikes welded together. That's it. No moving parts, no fancy engineering, no skilled blacksmith required. Just arrange them so one point always faces up, scatter a few hundred across a field, and wait. The genius is almost insulting. A warhorse cost more than most peasants earned in 20 years of backbreaking labor. One caltrop, maybe a few minutes of scrap metal and a campfire. The math here is absolutely brutal. Spend almost nothing, destroy something priceless. And horses didn't just stumble, they screamed. They threw riders, they panicked, and crashed into other horses, creating chain reactions of broken legs and crushed knights. One well-placed handful of iron could turn a thundering cavalry charge into absolute pandemonium. Now here's what really annoyed the nobility. You couldn't fight back against caltrops. No enemy to challenge. No opponent to defeat. Just invisible pain waiting in the grass like medieval landmines. Knights formally condemned caltrop use at tournaments, called it dishonorable, unchivalrous, beneath the dignity of proper warfare. Then they deployed thousands of them on actual battlefields. The Romans used caltrops against Hannibal's war elephants over 2,000 years ago. Japanese ninjas called them makibishi and scattered them while fleeing. Pursuit became suicidal when every step might cripple you. The design never changed because perfection doesn't need improvement. I love that about caltrops. 23 centuries of military innovation and nobody improved on 4 spikes stuck together. But stopping horses was only half the problem. Knights wore increasingly better armor. Regular crossbows struggled to punch through the newer plate designs. So engineers asked a simple question. What if we made crossbows ridiculously, absurdly more powerful? So engineers built the arbalest, same basic crossbow design, but absolutely monstrous. Regular crossbows had draw weights around 200 pounds. The arbalest, over 1,000 pounds. No human arm could pull that back. You needed a mechanical windlass, basically a hand crank that took forever to operate. And I mean forever. Loading took up to 2 minutes. Grab a coffee, do some stretches, maybe contemplate your life choices. Meanwhile, an English longbowman fired 12 arrows. But here's why armies didn't care about that loading time. When an arbalest bolt finally launched, it traveled 300 feet per second. Steel tip. Absolutely devastating. That bolt punched through plate armor at 200 yards. Knights who'd spent fortunes on the newest, thickest protection? Dead anyway. The same papal ban covering crossbows technically applied here too. Nobody listened. Every major European army stockpiled thousands of these weapons because military commanders understood something important. Wars aren't won by following rules. They're won by making the other side stop existing. Genoese crossbowmen became the most feared mercenaries in Europe. They specialized in arbalests and commanded triple the pay of regular soldiers. Kings paid whatever these guys asked because having them meant winning. But the weapon had one embarrassing weakness. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, rain soaked the Genoese crossbow strings. Wet strings stretch. Stretch strings lose power. Suddenly, these terrifying killing machines became expensive sticks. English longbowmen, whose strings they'd kept dry under their helmets, slaughtered them. Still, the arbalest proved something uncomfortable. Technology could erase a lifetime of training in seconds. A peasant with a windlass could kill the greatest swordsman alive. That realization bothered knights more than any church ban. And some weapons bothered them even more because they required no technology at all. Just brutal simplicity. Church authorities hated weapons designed to cause excessive suffering. They wrote entire documents about it. Very serious stuff. Meanwhile, monastery armories across Europe stockpiled morning stars, because nothing says Christian charity like a spiked metal ball on a stick. The Morning Star solved a problem that drove medieval warriors crazy. Plate armor had gotten too good. Swords bounced off. Axes glanced away. Knights in full plate could wade through entire battles barely scratched. So blacksmiths asked a simple question. Why cut through armor when you can just crush whatever's inside it? The design was brutally elegant. Heavy iron ball, nasty spikes radiating outward, solid wooden handle. Swing it at someone's helmet, and the blunt force transfers straight through the metal. The knight's skull shatters while his armor stays perfectly intact. Those spikes weren't just for show either. Each one concentrated the impact onto an area smaller than your fingertip. Helmets that laughed off sword blades suddenly had puncture holes. And the heads inside? Let's just say headaches were no longer a concern. Peasant armies absolutely loved this thing. A competent blacksmith could forge one in an afternoon. Training requirements: hit the other guy before he hits you. That's basically it. No fancy footwork, no years of swordsmanship practice. Swiss pikemen carried morning stars as sidearms. Their strategy was beautifully simple. Pike formations knocked knights off horses. Morning stars finished the job very efficient, very messy. The name itself is almost insulting. Morning star, like sunrise, like something beautiful. Victims probably had different words for it. Here's what made authorities nervous, though. This weapon erased class distinctions. A farmer with a morning star could kill a duke just as easily as another farmer, but some weapons went even further. They didn't just ignore skill differences. They made combat completely unpredictable. The war flail broke every rule of medieval combat, and I mean every single one. See, most weapons behave predictably. Sword swings in an arc. Axe comes down. Mace goes wherever you point it. Your opponent reads the movement, raises a shield, parries with their blade. Standard stuff. The flail? That chain connecting the handle to the spiked head created pure chaos. The striking ball whipped around shields like they weren't even there. Parrying swords? Useless. The chain just wrapped around the blade and the head kept coming. Tournament officials absolutely despised this thing. They tried banning it from competitions because even experienced fighters couldn't control it properly. Practice sessions ended with cracked skulls. Not the opponent's skulls either. The wielder's own skull. Here's the embarrassing truth about flails. They hurt their users almost as often as enemies. Swing wrong, and that spiked ball comes right back at your face. I've read accounts of soldiers accidentally killing the guy standing next to them. Friendly fire, medieval edition. But skilled users, absolutely terrifying. A good flail fighter could wrap that chain around your shield and yank it clean off your arm. 1 second, you're protected. Next second, you're standing there holding nothing while a spike ball accelerates toward your head. Some designs went completely overboard. Multiple chains, 3 or 4 smaller balls instead of one big one. Picture trying to track 4 separate projectiles all swinging at different speeds. You can't. That's the point. Peasant rebels carried flails converted from farming tools. Professional soldiers used purpose-built versions with longer chains. Both groups faced the same official disapproval. Both groups kept swinging anyway. Yet, even unpredictable weapons follow some rules of physics. The next weapon on our list, it broke something more fundamental than combat expectations. Forget everything you know about swords. The estoc wasn't really a sword at all. No cutting edge, none. Run your finger along the blade, and nothing happens. This thing was basically a 3-foot steel needle designed for one purpose, punching holes through plate armor, and knights absolutely hated it. See, proper sword fighting had rules. You slash, you parry, you demonstrate the skills you spent 20 years perfecting. The estoc ignored all of that. Why bother with elegant technique when you can just stab someone through the armpit? The blade's cross-section tells you everything. Triangular or diamond-shaped, rigid as a crowbar. Wounds from these shapes couldn't be stitched closed. Surgeons tried. Patients bled out anyway. Here's what made it truly nasty. Armored knights had tiny vulnerable spots. Eye slits in the visor, gaps at the armpit, the groin joint where leg plates met the body. The estoc turned every fight into a game of find the weak point. That gap under your arm, suddenly it's the only thing that matters. French knights learned this the hard way at Agincourt in 1415. They charged across muddy fields, got stuck, and fell over in their heavy armor. English soldiers walked among them with estoc-style blades, calmly poking through visors. Thousands died face down in the mud, killed by what their grandfathers would have called cheating. Some estocs stretched over 5 feet long. Picture that. Foot soldiers could reach mounted knights without getting anywhere near sword range. Just stand back and thrust. My favorite detail? Wealthy knights started adding extra armor patches over their weak spots. More weight, more expense, all because of a weapon that cost a fraction of a proper sword. But even the estoc followed medieval logic. The next weapon, it threw out the rulebook entirely. Here's the thing about everything we've covered. The crossbow, Greek fire, poisoned blades, all of it. They still followed one basic rule. You had to face your enemy. The arquebus threw that out completely. This early firearm was basically a metal tube that spat lead balls using explosive powder. Point it vaguely towards someone and pull a lever. Done. No skill, no honor, no chance for your opponent to demonstrate why his family spent generations mastering combat. And knights lost their minds over it. French knight Bayard became famous for executing captured arquebusiers as criminals. Not prisoners of war, criminals. Because in his mind, killing a nobleman from 100 yards away wasn't warfare. It was murder. Emperor Maximilian I tried banning firearms entirely from honorable combat in the late 1400s, called them cowardly instruments unfit for proper soldiers. The church wasn't thrilled either. Smoke, thunder, the stench of sulfur. Some clergy genuinely believed gunpowder was Satan's recipe. And honestly, watching your friends explode from invisible death probably felt pretty hellish. But here's what sealed the deal. Pavia, 1525, Spanish arquebusiers faced French knights in their finest plate armor. 8,000 dead nobles, 8,000. Generations of breeding, training, and fortune building ended by farmers holding metal tubes. Within 50 years, full plate armor became costume jewelry. No metal thickness could economically stop lead. The math simply didn't work anymore. My grandfather always said technology eventually beats tradition. He was talking about tractors replacing horses, but the principle fits. Every banned weapon on this list tried to level the playing field. The arquebus didn't level it. It burned the whole field down and salted the earth. Knighthood never recovered.